welcome to Tuesdays With, a regular program, monthly program that is sponsored by the Friends of the Georgetown Library. My name is Bob Willey, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Friends of the Georgetown Library, and we're very glad you've joined us today. I'd like to first of all thank Heather Pelham, who is the technologist behind this that allows us to be able to do this creatively and wonderfully during this continuing concern for everyone's health, and are looking forward to being able to get back person to person sometime in the near future. Today for our May program, we have Tuesday with Julie Warren. Julie is a native of Virginia, a graduate of Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee. Immediately after her graduation, undergraduate studies, she worked for Colonial Williamsburg and Monticello before receiving her master's degree in museum studies from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in Great Britain. She came to this area to work with the South Carolina State Park Service at the Hampton Plantation, and in 2007 became a part of the staff of the Georgetown County Library, joining the library in the newly funded Georgetown County Digital Library, about which we'll hear much today. That digital library is absolutely incredible. More than 50,000 photographs, newspapers, maps, and other historic records related to Georgetown County and the Low Country. The digital library collection has been utilized by scholars, researchers, filmmakers, and authors across the world. PBS, SCE-TV, CNN, and ABC have all used photos from the digital library archive here in Georgetown, highlighting the importance of Georgetown's rich history around the globe. The Georgetown County Digital Library was one of the first organizations to join the Digital Public Library of America, working alongside the Library of Congress, the National Archive, and the Smithsonian to create a freely accessible archive of American history and culture. Julie's work has, in fact, allowed her to be able to speak internationally on behalf of the Georgetown County Digital Library, speaking a few years back at a conference in Birmingham, England in 2019. Julie's very active, serving on the board of the Georgetown County Women's Hall of Fame, the South Carolina Federation of Museums, the South Carolina Baptist Convention History Committee, as well as serving in a voluntary way very actively within the community of the South Carolina Maritime Museum, the Kaminsky House Museum, the Hobcall Barony, and the Wooden Boat Show. She's staying busy. But when she's not scanning photographs, volunteering, or working around the community, Julie usually can be found Googling airline prices to the United Kingdom and trying to figure out how to become a Jane Austen heroine in the 21st century. Indeed, she is. We are very glad to have Julie Warren with us today to speak on History at Your Fingertips, the Georgetown County Digital Library. I'd like to mention that as you're watching this presentation today and you have any questions for Julie, just to go ahead and send those in on that Facebook, and Julie will get back to you responding to your questions with text and being able to support and answer your questions. Julie, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and we look forward to your presentation. Thanks so very much for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Well, good morning, and thank you very much to the Friends of the Georgetown County Library for asking me to speak today. It's always an honor and a pleasure to come to the auditorium here in our library and have a chance to share a little bit about the work that we've been able to do this last year or so. It has been a little bit of a challenge this last year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as the presentation continues, but we're happy to say that we've kept on working, we've kept on scanning, and we've had a pretty good year, so we're happy to report that. So a little bit of a background for those of you that may not be familiar with our digital library or even what a digital library is. It's a little bit different for some people, but we have a long history here in the library of being in Georgetown County. In fact, the first library society was founded in Georgetown in 1799. And that society collected books, manuscripts, newspapers, and other items, and they were preserved and eventually became part of our collection here at the library. And over the years, those items were added to. More letters, photographs, and other manuscripts were added. And so by 2006, roughly, the library realized that we had a collection that needed to be preserved. Disasters do happen. Mother Nature can be our own worst enemy here in the Low Country. We've all lived through hurricanes and electrical storms and other things, and we know that sometimes items and collections can be lost, and we wanted to make sure that that did not happen here in the library. So in the early 2000s, we began to plan on what we could do to make sure these items were preserved. And we applied for a grant with the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, and luckily, about 2007, we received the grant, and work began here in the library to preserve our history. Our first collection in the library that we began to preserve was the Morgan and Trenum collection. And as you see in the photographs here on our screen, these are just a very small sampling of some of the photographs that we were able to save. But the history of the collection itself, Mayor William Doyle Morgan was in Georgetown right at the turn of the 20th century. And he was a mayor who believed very strongly in promoting Georgetown. And he worked endlessly with civic groups in the city and in the county to do just that. And he hired professional photographers to come in and capture really everyday life for the citizens of Georgetown. These photographers captured life from the farms to the ocean, and we were able to really enjoy these photographs now because of his progressive thinking. The photos range from about the 1890s to 1915, and they are some of the clearest photographs that we actually have in the collection. So we're quite happy to have this collection. Churches, businesses, civic groups, parade are all frozen in time thanks to the photographers who came to Georgetown and took these fabulous photos. At the same time that Morgan was here, Alfred G. Trenum was a local businessman who ran the local telephone company, and Mr. Trenum was also an amateur photographer. Mr. Trenum went around taking additional photographs, and those photos in the 1990s were combined with Mr. Morgan's photographs, and the Morgan Trenum collection was born. We scanned over 900 photographs in this one collection, and that was the original collection added to our digital library. When we created our digital library, we realized that our library wasn't the only archive or source of history in our area. We realized that there were a lot of other organizations that had collections that needed to be preserved for the same reasons. Again, hurricanes, flood, humidity, and just human error can lead to disaster. So we began to reach out to local organizations, Brook Green Gardens, the Bell Baruch Foundation, the Georgetown County Museum, the Kaminsky House, and others, some small, some large, and we contacted them about what they might want to do with their collection. They began to partner with us, and we scanned their collections and slowly began to add them to the online archive. Luckily, as we did that, we also began to work with smaller organizations and sometimes families and individuals who realized that what we were doing was important, and we were, in fact, preserving the history of Georgetown. So you can see in the list here behind me, this is a list of what is currently on our digital library. And so you'll see familiar organizations, again, Brook Green Gardens, the Kaminsky House, the Georgetown County Museum, but then there are other organizations or other collections that are much smaller, but are just as important to our history of Georgetown. So we're wanting to save the history of the average man as well as the history of the more important and more famous ones that we're more familiar with. So the diverse communities in our county have been captured on film for generations. Many of Georgetown's earliest settlers came to this area from European countries to find freedom of religion. And the area that is southern part of the county was originally known as the French Santee. Huguenots settled here, and over the years, those religious freedoms brought even more people into our area. Many of the Jewish faith settled in this area, and so names like Baruch, Kaminsky, Abrams, Eric, Fogel, Sampson, and Cohen are familiar to us today, and they opened businesses and served as city officials in the 19th and 20th centuries. Eventually, other immigrants came to our area, and they migrated to our southern town. By 1890, the first families from Lebanon began to settle in Georgetown, wanting to escape the fighting in their own country and find a better life for their families. Soon, over a dozen families had settled here, and names like Joseph, Cosma, Thomas, Curry, and Isaac soon became a familiar part of our county. In 2018, the Georgetown County Library began to collect the history and stories of many of these families. And that culminated in a documentary that we produced called The Lebanese Legacy. But we've only scratched the surface of preserving the history of these diverse communities, and we hope in the future to be able to preserve even more. But as we say, history is more than just photographs. Our original grant covered the digitization of photographs, mostly with those organizations, our own and others in the community. But we knew that more was out there. And so we began to contact other people and see what else we had out there, and sort of went down the rabbit hole, as we like to say, into the archives. So lots of great things to find. We also received other grants during that time from the Library and Services and Technology Act that also helped provide funding to scan some of these great items. So our 18th and 19th century real estate indentures are actually the oldest items that we have in our collection. The very oldest item is a 1733 land grant from John Abbott in Craven County, which was sort of now what we consider to be part of Georgetown County. And this handwritten document was a land transaction between John Abbott and the Lord proprietors at that time. We have 104 land real estate indentures in our collection. Many of them are faded, but a lot of them are not. And you can see in the photos here, the handwriting is pristine, it's beautiful. These are maps and other land transactions, and they are all quite interesting to take a look at. So the one in the top right corner is dated 1734, and it involves a Joseph Poole and a John Wades. Their first several sentences are legal jargon. They're talking about telling us the date, the year, and our king, George II. And then it goes on to tell us a lot of very confusing and repetitive verbiage. So basically giving this land grant. On the right-hand side, we have our newspapers, and these are also very, very popular collection we have, and they are actually probably the most well-used collection. They're 19th and 20th century, but there are big gaps in them. That is for several different reasons. For instance, during the time of the American Civil War, there was no productive newspaper in Georgetown, so we don't have news coming out of Georgetown. But we have a lot of newspapers from the early 19th century, and then we have some from the 20th century. They are all keyword searchable and quite fun to go through. Researchers love them because they can find a lot of information in them. But I will also tell you that they are quite, you start looking for one thing and then realize, 2 days later that you're still reading the same ad about something else, because you can kind of get a little bit sidetracked when you go through our newspapers. But another project that we hope to continue, we have scanned and digitized up to a certain date, but we hope in the near future to be able to add to those newspapers. There's always more newspapers to add to our collection. So we also have in our collection a lot of lovely other items like diaries, scrapbooks, and letters. These are really very, very personal items. And certainly when people are keeping these items, they're not thinking that they're ever going to end up in an archive somewhere. They give a real personal insight into people's lives. And so we were able to get a lot of these through donations, people from the outside realizing that their families or the ancestors' voices relating to a certain time period are important. And they bring them to us and we scan them. Often we will return them. We don't always keep everything. And we are happy to preserve history through these various formats. We have, for instance, over here, we have a World War II diary. This gentleman was a pilot with the U.S. Army Air Corps, and he is in various places in the world during World War II, and he's writing basically his daily life, what he's getting up and doing every day, and then he's talking about what he's doing, flying out and that sort of thing. So again, a very personal reflection of life during this period. We also have the letters of Lieutenant William Dorr, that's on the right-hand side over there, and you can see as you go through this collection his memories. He's stationed in the Pacific on a ship out there, and he was actually at Iwo Jima. So his letters home to his family full of reflections and firsthand accounts of that battle. The top corner we have a scrapbook kept again by William Doyle Morgan, the mayor of Georgetown, who hired all these professional photographers and other things. These are his personal scrapbooks, and they're full of newspaper clippings and articles and drawings and things that he did from probably about the 1870s to the early 1900s. They show his interest in Georgetown. He's clipping newspapers from all over the state, and he's talking about, he's gathering information because he wants to learn what others are doing so that he can use that information here in Georgetown. So they are of the era that he's living in, so there are some things in there that we might not clip today, but they are still full of information in Georgetown in that early period. And then we have scrapbooks of photographs from young girls, people living in Georgetown at the time. This is a Kaminsky scrapbook at the top. She used to go to her family home in Pawleys Island, and she had a small camera that she took photos of her friends and her pets and her brothers and sisters. And, it's just like anybody else's scrapbook today, where you might just go and take fun photos. And so it really reflects and gives us a personal view of life at that time period. So we're quite happy to have those as part of our collection as well. Now, in addition to all our other items, we have lots and lots of postcards. And postcards are a personal favorite, and you can see why. They're so colorful, they grab your attention. Sometimes they show buildings that are no longer standing, so they give us a record of what something looked like. Sometimes they're photographs that have been hand-colored. Sometimes they're these other type of images that are just sort of a great pop of color for our collection. And they really give us, again, a look into life in Georgetown in that early period. But not only are these photographs postcards great photos, but a lot of times if you turn them over, they have actually been sent to somebody local or sometimes not local, and they'll have addresses, they'll have inscriptions, they'll have stamps. There's all kinds of great stuff on the back of a postcard. And so we scan these, we put them online as well, and they do give us a lot of fun information to add. We currently have quite a few in our collection, and we have more waiting to go online in the near future. So we also have, for instance, the John LaBruce collection, which features over 300 postcards. He was a local gentleman in Georgetown, and he collected these and preserved them, and he gave them to the Georgetown County Museum. And they were part of their collection, but we've scanned them, and so the subjects aren't all Georgetown, they're not all South Carolina, but they're all things that he collected and he felt were important. And so you may have something in Virginia, you may have the Grand Canyon, the Alamo, but they're all early 1900s, and they're great fun to go through. So everyday life for Georgetown has been largely captured in our photographs. And they're a lot of fun to start looking through, because sometimes photographs are posed. Sometimes you can see that the photographer has set people up a certain way, but sometimes they're very candid and they show life as in a frozen second as people are gathering and doing something fun. For researchers, our photographs can be invaluable. They show us something that we can no longer see ourselves. They help us to travel back in time. When tall ships sat in our harbor at Georgetown, it's been a long time since we've seen any of those, but for a point in Georgetown's history, those were an everyday occurrence. We hard to imagine that today, but at one point, our harbor looked much different. One of the nice things about our photographs is that when we scan them at a high resolution and we place them online, they can be revealing details that you would never have seen in the original. So you can zoom in our photographs. For instance, The top photograph in the middle is Mr. Crowley's store. The store is no longer standing on Front Street, but in the photograph online, you can zoom in and actually see what's on the shelves. And those weren't props. Those were things that people were actually buying in Georgetown at that time. Mr. Crowley was a very important businessman in Georgetown, and this photograph of the interior of his shop is one that we treasure because it's all gone today. So it's now been captured and preserved in this format. Same as the one with the lighthouse on the far right. Most of us know where the lighthouse is. We've seen it from the water, but very few people know that at one point there was a pavilion there and that residents of Georgetown could go out and have parties and dances and excursions out to the island. And it was a destination to get away from the heat and oppression of the summer in Georgetown. And so you can see in the photograph, crowds of people going up to the pavilion to party and dance with the lighthouse still standing beside it. Those buildings that we see in the photograph are all gone today, and life has changed so much we can no longer even really get over there and do anything. You just see it from the water. So again, we just kind of see glimpses of life as it used to be for the residents of Georgetown County. So a lot of fun things to see in our photographs. So sort of by the numbers, and these are kind of fun because they really give you a chance to see how things have grown. We do have a little over 50,000 items currently online. You can see by the numbers how many of those things we have. Like I said, we have quite a few postcards. We have more waiting to go online. 46 collections currently. Newspapers are one of our largest collections individually just because of all of the newspapers that we do have. We also collect oral histories. We have history videos that we produced in-house. We have yearbooks that are incredibly important to us as well, real estate indentures. So a lot of really great things here go in to make this one online collection. So very much by the numbers here for us. And also, the nice thing about these numbers is they're not set in stone. They do continue to increase. And so as time goes by, all of those numbers will be added to. So we all have a story to tell. And one of the most exciting and one of the best parts of my job is that I get to help do our oral histories. And if you've ever talked to a parent or a grandparent or a neighbor, anybody that you know, and asked them about life before you or when they were a child, then you've participated in an oral history. And that's one of the things that we've been able to do in our Georgetown County Library. And we've been able to work with men and women from all different backgrounds, all different areas of life, and we have talked to them about religion, we've talked to them about going to church, World War II, the Great Depression, and many other subjects. And so we're going to play a video, and we're going to listen to some of our local residents talk about life here in Georgetown County when they were young.
Oh, I'm the oldest. Can't you tell?
Oh, sure you were.
I try to be the matriarch, but, you know. I am June Chandler Horror, and I was born here, well, in Florence, but I've lived at Merle's in 1925, May the 30th, 1925. And, but I was born in Florence. In those days, there was no hospital or anything else here. You had to go to Florence to have a baby. So my sister and my oldest brother were born in Florence too. And then they had the hospital in Conway, and Joe was born there, but Bill was born at Waukesha, and my uncle got him out of a stump down there, he told us. But
that was the story he told you and Sis.
I know it. He was a doctor, and he delivered Bill there. But I remember, I don't know how old I was when we went to Waukesha. I probably was about 8, because Sister was born, and Tommy was born at Waukesha, the oldest brother. And that was really, you know, during the Depression, Sister had a godmother who Mama had been with over in Germany during the First World War, and she was Sister's godmother. She was also Miss Kimball at Waukesha. She was her cousin, I think. Anyway, she would send a nice check to my sister every year for her birthday. So Daddy bought a radio so he could listen to FDR's fireside chats. And so that was really exciting because at that point, rural electrification had not even gotten in, and we had lamps to study by. We did have running water, and finally did get electricity.
All right, so besides preservation, another area that we try to focus on in our digital library is the increased accessibility. We're doing this not only to make sure that the photographs are around for future generations, but we want to make sure that people out there can have access to them and use them for multiple ways. Institutions like ours realize that the majority of researchers out there will never be able to set foot into our archives. They'll never be able to come into the library. And even if they do come to the library, chances are they're not going to be actually able to physically handle things that we have. Most of them are very fragile, they're very rare, and they are therefore kept in a climate-controlled, locked environment. So not only do we now scan these items and put them online, but they are now able to be accessed for, as Bob mentioned, a number of resources, a number of organizations can now take advantage of that. Our website is gcdigital.org, if we haven't mentioned that already. And people can go online and research and find images that they would like to use. And typically what they do is that they then contact me and ask how to use them. If the organization that the photo belongs to doesn't belong to us, we contact them. So for instance, Brook Green Gardens or Baruch Foundation has an image on our collection, and somebody wants to use it, then we pass it on to that organization. So rights are preserved, but images are shared, and the information is therefore now really accessible worldwide. So ETV, PBS have both used our images for multiple documentaries. Ken Burns has used us, and museums, both local and national, have used our images recently. So we really enjoy that. It's good for us to be able to go out into the community and see how the images are being used and shared. And so not only are they on our website, they're not only in our building, but they're now out there for everybody to see. So we're really excited about that. And also, as Bob mentioned in our intro, the South Carolina Digital Library, which is a statewide consortium of digital libraries, we're part of that. And we're also part of the Digital Public Library of America, which began several years ago. And we worked with the Library of Congress, we worked with the National Archives here in the United States, we worked with Smithsonian and other small and large organizations to create this huge national archive where images are now freely accessible for anybody who wants to look at them. So very exciting. So in November 2019, the Georgetown County Library and the Digital Library we were invited to speak, or I was invited to speak at the DCDC Conference in Birmingham, England. This is hosted by the National Archives, the Research Libraries of the UK, and JSTOR. And this Discovering Collections, Discovering Communities conference was the perfect opportunity to share what our small library in a small southern town has been able to do for the past 14 years. This was a 3-day conference that brought together people from across the library, archive, and museum sector of the UK and Europe. I was one of 3 Americans that were able to speak at this conference and very much enjoyed being able to share what we were doing here in Georgetown. After I kept introducing myself and telling them where Georgetown was, because obviously not very many people knew, but it was a great opportunity to get in there and really share what we're doing here in South Carolina. The Friends of the Georgetown Library generously helped to fund this trip over to the UK, as well as the State Library and private donations. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to speak in front of this large crowd. As you can see in the photograph, that is not me in the front. That is actually Liz Jolly, who's the director of the British Library, who I did actually meet. I chased her down after the meeting just so I could shake her hand and introduce myself, because she's the director of the British Library. But she was quite delightful, and I really had she did a wonderful job, obviously speaking, but it was a crowd very similar to what you see in the the photograph, and then I was part of a panel afterwards where people were able to ask us more about what we were doing here in South Carolina. So it was quite a lot of fun. And so if you've ever been to the UK, you know that there's lots of history, a lot of really old history, and so being able to go over there and tell some of Georgetown's newer history was quite an honor. So where we are today, fast forward here. So as we are all aware, 2020 and sadly 2021 have had a few challenges for us. The Georgetown County Library closed last year for several months during the beginning of the pandemic, and staff, however, continue to work in the building. Luckily, in my job, I'm able to continue doing pretty much normal activities when we were closed to the public. In fact, I would say probably I did a little bit more than I normally did because I no longer had meetings or trips out of the city of Georgetown to Columbia and other places. So I was able to really stay in my office and do a lot of projects that had been sort of put off recently. So it was actually quite a nice time to be here working in my office. Then this past January 2021, Georgetown County government was hacked by an unknown group. And so our phones, our email, internet, and our computer documents all disappeared overnight. Luckily, our photographs for the digital library are stored externally on drives that are kept local and remotely, so those were never in any danger. But access to our digital library website and other files were inaccessible. Phones and email were gradually restored to us. Internet came back just a few weeks ago in early May, and now life is slowly coming back to normal. But during this time when we were down, we weren't just sitting staring at the wallpaper in our offices. We were able to continue to scan because our computers still worked, they still could turn on, and we still managed to scan. So I began to do, as I like to say, scan everything out in our collection that we hadn't had a chance to do. And we scanned over 37 items recently between the end of January and now. So these are a lot of items that have been donated to us recently. We suddenly had a chance to do some of that as well. And you can see in the photograph, the slide here, just the variety of things that we were able to work on. Some yearbooks, we have some cookbooks, we have letters from the Winyell Indigo School. That collection alone has over 2,500 items. Those items we'll transcribe and then get online when we can, but the items have now been scanned and preserved. So a lot of fun things waiting in the wings to get online. Now that we have internet back, hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later. So our final thoughts. So we're really grateful that our library and archive continue to grow. New items are donated to us fairly often, and we're very excited that people recognize us as an archive worthy of their donation. We've had several big, important collections donated to us recently, and we're busy scanning and adding those as we can. One collection in the top right corner over there are negatives. Those have recently been loaned to us. These are from the 1950s, and they are a wonderful collection, and we are working to preserve them. They are fragile because of their age, and they are slowly beginning to break down and deteriorate. So we are working to try to preserve the images that are captured in there. They give us a look at life in the more recent history, which is something that people enjoy as well. The Morgan Trenholm collection is wonderful in the early 1800s or 1900s, but most of the people living today don't remember that time period. So the 1950s, though, are more of a memorable era, and people can identify with them. So we're excited to be able to sort of fill in that gap of our history online. Another great event that we like to look forward to in the library is the future expansion of our library and rare book room. And due to some generous donations and some funding, we are now going to be able to start this fall with the expansion and renovation of the building. Our library was built in the late 1980s, and we have really begun to outgrow much of what's here. Our rare book room is no exception, as you can see in the photograph. We are now at full capacity in that space. We have nowhere else to put anything. Our shelves are small and unfortunately not really designed for boxes. So we have things stored in archival boxes for preservation and humidity control, but we don't have anywhere else to grow. My office now has become Rare Book Room 2.0, and I'd like to eventually get all of those items into our Rare Book Room as well. So that room will be expanded, we hope, in the near future. Hurricane season starts June 1st, and we're always mindful of those hurricanes, and as they begin to approach the coastline, we're on standby, and we use plastic sheeting to cover most of what you see in the photographs. And our new expanded Rare Book Room will have permanent sheeting ready to be pulled out if a storm approaches our coastline. So finally, partnership and outreach here in Georgetown County Library. We like to work with people and help them preserve their family history. It's not just our history that we have in our building, it's our history in the county itself. And so if people come to us asking questions about their own archives, their own family photos, letters, whatever, we're happy to talk to them. We're happy to offer advice. And if they want us to help scan things and preserve them that way, we can do that as well. So there's always new projects, new collections, new things coming in to us. I can't guarantee that if you bring us something to scan, it'll happen tomorrow. As you can see, we were pretty backlogged on trying to get other things done and pretty much work as fast as we can. But we're always here and open and willing to talk to people about all of that. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. We've joked in the last few months that we were going to revert to carrier pigeons, but luckily we're able to have email and phones restored. So you can get in touch with us that way if you want to. You can also stop by the library on Cleveland Street and ask for me personally. So just follow the whir of the scanner and you'll hear me working in my office. But feel free to contact us, reach out to us, ask questions. If you're on social media and you want to follow us on Facebook, we'd like that as well. We try to post regularly and we encourage comments and likes and all that sort of thing online. We like our photos to be shared and people to really get a chance to have access to all this great history. So thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion about the digital library. Again, feel free to contact me and have a great day.
Thank you, Julie, very, very much. Now, don't go walking off. You need to stay. I just thank you for a wonderful presentation about incredible work you're doing in a collection that's just amazing. I appreciate that very much. I'll share some autobiographical information, if I may. One of the things that my wife and I did when we first came to Georgetown as a part of our orientation was to watch some of those oral histories. And they really helped us to understand people and history and relationships. It's just very warm and personable in that series. This was particularly the Depression series. It was so helpful to understand that period of Georgetown's history and a number of the people who lived through that period of time. And then I realized if I was going to understand Georgetown, I had to understand the Civil War. And I remember rewatching Ken Burns' series on the Civil War. And all of a sudden, as I'm going through it, I'm saying, that's Georgetown. And there's a photograph in Ken Burns' Georgetown or Civil War series in which there's actually a photograph of, I think it's Prince Street, or it might be, anyway, somewhere along Broad Street that has a picture of Georgetown from our collection. A few questions, if I may.
Sure.
I also want to encourage people to send questions in through the Facebook, and Julie will be answering those for you. One of the questions I have is, as you look to the future, you've mentioned the collections you have here to catch up on, and newspapers to be added that you want to make sure. Are there other things that you have a vision for, or if you had a heart's desire that you'd like to see? Obviously, as you mentioned, people contributing their collections of various things that might be helpful to the archives. Anything else that comes to mind that what's that one thing that you would like to get a hold of?
I'm not sure I can list any one thing because there's just so much history out there, but we just really try to represent our communities as much as we can. So, the more diverse we can be, the more accurate representation of history. So we definitely want to try to encourage everybody in our community, no matter who they are or where they've come from or what they do, to definitely realize that their history is as important to us as the next person. So if people have history, if they have an old photograph, family collection, a diary maybe, something relating to the early history of our area in any way. We certainly would like to collect that. So there's really not one particular era or any particular item that I'd say we were looking for, but just anything, and it would be great. I mean, the negatives that I talked about that we received recently, we didn't even know they were out there, and so we were contacted, and so, but once they've come to us, we've realized how important these are to our community. So it's hard to really know what is out there because there's just so many things that we just can't even imagine, but we just encourage people to pull out those shoe boxes and to look in their attics and see what's out there and really realize that even though it may just be old photographs and old things to them that they've grown up with their whole life, realize that these might be just as important to the next person.
Yeah, important to understanding more of the history and diversity of Georgetown County, and the Low Country.
Right.
I'm sure this is a question an archivist and even that conference you attended in Birmingham would have brought up, but in our society today, there aren't going to be archives. That's the problem. There won't be photographs, there won't be postcards, there won't be diaries. Everything is literally digitalized. What does the culture of archivists like yourself say about the future, and how are we going to preserve this era? I mean, even to talk about the pandemic, everything is going to be on Facebook and emails and Twitter and those kinds of things. The record is not going to be there in a person's diary.
Right. That's where what they call born digital items. So these are items that are never in a physical format. They are born digital. They're coming from online archives, online newspapers and things. And there are organizations that really focus on gathering those. If you go on to, for instance, the Library of Congress or the National Archives, they are collecting websites, they're collecting newspapers that are online, and they do try to actively preserve what's already digital out there. So there are ways of capturing those digital things. We don't do a whole lot of it in-house just because we don't have the ability to do that. But then that's also where a lot of our oral histories come in as important. So people are already starting to sit down and talk to people that have lived through the pandemic and capture those memories now while we're able to still do that. So oral histories and really just capturing those websites and those things out there. Newspapers that are still being produced, things like that, those are still being actively preserved. But definitely archives in the future will look very different because letters, things like that are just not being saved. And even emails, you may write family members an email or send cards or things like that online. We try to encourage people even just to save some of those if you can, because you can even print them off or save them on a file, save them somewhere on a computer. But just save as much as you can and be aware that if you're not saving it, it probably will disappear. So we just encourage people to try to think of the future and try to save what they can.
And like Mayor Morgan, keep going with those scrapbooks.
Absolutely, scrapbooks are good.
Keep scrapbooking anyway.
I'll keep a physical scrapbook of a trip to the UK or something like that, which people would go, why are you keeping a physical one? But, those ticket stubs and those brochures and things you can still gather, they're still important, and hopefully in the future they'll still be around for people to enjoy.
And again, going back to access, how do people go on? What's the route to get online to be able to look at it? Because it is a lot of fun, and it does, I'll affirm your comment about getting addictive and running down side trails that you had no intention of looking at.
Right, absolutely. We have a website, it's gcdigital.org, and we'll put it up on the screen for you. And you can just go to it from any computer, a smartphone, tablet, whatever you want to use. As long as you have internet access, you can get to it. And it's keyword searchable, and you just get in there and start looking at all the collections. You put a term in the keyword search, and it'll bring everything up that it can, from newspapers to photographs and everything in between.
Excellent. Well, Julie, thank you.
Thank
Wonderful
you, Bob.
presentation, very informative, and again, fantastic work you're doing. I appreciate that, and the commitment of the library, the Georgetown County Library, to this, to have it available, the best in the Southeast and probably the best in the country, but that will not overstate our case too much.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Just so glad that you were able to join us today for this wonderful presentation. And again, I want to thank Heather Pelham, who's been doing the technology behind the scenes and allowing us to be able to present this to you today, as well as those who can listen on later on as it becomes a part of YouTube. Next month, actually, we're extending our schedule by 1 month this year. Usually May was our final presentation, but we're very excited the fact that we're going to have a June Tuesdays With as well. That'll be on Tuesday, June 15th, our final lecture in the 2020-2021 series of Tuesdays With, and that will be with Dedrick Bond. An excellent presentation. I know you'll want to join us. Dedrick is a Georgetown teacher, historian, researcher, and administrator here within the community. Very well known, very well spoken. And we want to encourage you to join us as he'll be doing a presentation on the life and times of Joseph Hayne Rainey. Probably the most important person who's ever been here in Georgetown, and would encourage you to hear that presentation about a gentleman who had a tremendous impact, not just on our own community, but in fact on the entire nation at a critical time during Reconstruction. I thank you all for joining us, and again to Julie, I thank you for your wonderful presentation today. Stay healthy and well. Bye.